The first time Maya saw the portrait hall in the Carter house, she thought she'd stepped into a museum of ghosts. Proud faces that never blinked, eyes that seemed to count the years she didn't belong. She smiled, held John's hand, and told herself love would be the only language they needed. But the house spoke a different language. It whispered warnings in the drafts, hid answers behind locked doors, and kept a secret that would make the family's teeth crack with shame. Before we dig deep into this shocking story, kindly hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss real stories that reveal the darkest truths and biggest betrayals. Maya Ebe was 30, bright and uncomfortably brave. Born and raised in Lagos, she had moved to England for art school, met John Carter at a gallery opening, fallen in love the way two people with worn maps do, by tracing each other's margins until the lines matched. John was easy laughter and late-night confessions. Raised in an old county house whose ivy crawled like a family tree, he promised a gentle beginning when he proposed in the rain. The Carters were the kind of family that collected legacies, like heirlooms, ancestors' virtues, polished into the woodwork. A spotless genealogy stuffed into velvet-lined drawers, manners like armor. John's mother, Vivian, was a statue with a smile as thin as a topiary edge. His father, Arthur, a man who spoke in ledger entries. Aunt Lillian's eyes were small, suspicious cameras. John was their bridge. Maya was the bridge's unexpected paint. From the first evening under the chandeliers, the household's warmth was conditional. It arrived in smiles that froze at the edges, in well-meant questions about foreign customs, in the polite, heavy silence when Maya used idioms that didn't land. John apologized in whispers. Maya shrugged the slights away because, like the gallery pieces she loved, she believed there was something raw and human to be found if she looked close enough. It began with the portraits. They lined the grand staircase, stern forebears and powdered wigs, sterner women with parasols, a child with a ribboned hair that no one ever named. One rainy afternoon, while waiting for John to return from the study, Maya lingered and found, tucked behind a tapestry, a painting not in the official lineup, a small, faded portrait of a dark-skinned child, eyes both defiant and wounded. Maya asked Vivian about it at dinner. Vivian's knife paused midair. "Oh, that? A servant's child," she said, dismissing the question the way one discards a moth. Arthur cleared his throat. "Irrelevant," he added, eyes cold. John's face went pale. He told Maya later that it was just an old mistake and that she shouldn't worry. But the portrait would not let go. Maya noticed it in her dreams. The child's eyes following her through rooms, the crooked smile that might have been a plea. She started to look for patterns. A name in the guest book miswritten, a letter folded into a book on the mantel, a lock on the attic that John said was just for the plumber. One night, driven by a small, stubborn need she couldn't explain, Maya crept into the study while John slept. The hall smelled of polished fruit and cedar. The attic door resisted but eventually surrendered with a groan. The attic was a museum of the family's paper journals, bundles of brittle letters, newspaper clippings that smelled like dust and pretense. She found a namekeeper's nightmare, a ledger listing shipments and payments, dates that matched voyages to West Africa in the 1800s, the name Carter & Co. Inked next to phrases that read like a ledger for people. Hidden among the shipping records was a bundle tied with faded, blue ribbon, letters from one Benjamin Carter, written from a port city, to a woman named Nkem. The handwriting was feverish, urgent. The letters spoke of promises of a child of a shame they could not name. Maya read until the thin light became indecipherable. There were confessions in the margins, references to removing the child to England, to arrangements made so the scandal would never taint the family. The word privilege was stained with the weight of a human life. When John woke to find her sitting at the attic steps, the ribbon crumbled between her fingers. "How long?" she asked. He could not meet her eyes. "Long," he said finally. "Too long." Maya began asking discreet questions in town. Nothing headline-making. Just the sort of conversations a curious new member of a community has. The history of old houses. The name of a long-closed mission. Whether anyone remembered a child who never returned. People in the market lowered their voices. An old vicar with a tremor in his hand produced a ledger that listed a baptismal name, Sarah, and a godparent entry signed in a neat hand that matched, none other than Vivian's. In the library's microfilm, Maya found a small column tucked away. Carter estate donated to parish. Beneath it, a terse notation mentioned a small girl, transported under the guardianship of a Carter cousin. A name recurred in different scripts: Sarah, sorry like a ghost that had been renamed to fit the ledger. Then Mama Eno, an elderly woman who worked in the Carter kitchens for decades, took Maya's hands. Her palms were like folded maps. They called her a ward, she said. They called her many things, but she was family-shaped. She slid across a scrap of paper, a list of expenses for schooling, clothing, transport with the child's name in the margin. They gave the child a name inside, but outside she was for the pantry and the stairs. They kept her on a leash of favors. Maya felt the ground shift beneath. John's family, as if the house was built on a lie that had finally been measured and found too narrow. John's shoulders curled like a man closing against a storm. Faced with the evidence, his defenses came slowly apart. There were things we never spoke of, he said, rubbing his temple. My grandparents were ashamed of what they did, not of what they created. Ashamed of the shape of the scandal. They believed the past couldn't touch the present if they never named it. Maya wanted to ask why they would keep such a burden like a family heirloom. She wanted to ask why people would hold someone's fate as a dirty secret rather than a truth to write. Instead, she asked, who was she? What happened to Sarah? John's answer was small and jagged. The family ensured she was out of the way, sent away, married off into obscurity. Some say she left town, others say she died. No one asked her name. His voice broke on the last sentence. That night, someone left a sealed envelope on Maya's doorstep. Inside was an old photograph, the small, dark-skinned child of the portrait's eyes, captured in a century-worn square, and behind her a young Vivian, arm across shoulders with a smile that did not reach the eyes. On the back were 3 words, not for you. The message was thin but heavy. It meant the house had watchers, people who still protected a fiction with claws. Maya began to put the pieces together in the small hours. Letters, baptism records, an elderly cook's testimony, an envelope, a ledger line. The more she found, the clearer the shape of a hidden branch became. A child of Benjamin Carter and Nkem, renamed Sarah, who had been moved to England, ostensibly for safety. But safety had been a barrier erected to hide an inconvenient truth. The family's bloodline was not as monochrome as their portrait hall suggested. At a funeral for one of the older Carters, Maya overheard a niece mutter, "We had to keep things tidy. You know how these things look." It struck her then that their reputation had been built atop a buried human history, and the burial had been deliberate. A cultural embalming of shame. Vivian's confession came later in a small kitchen at dawn, the kind of quiet place where truth sometimes loses its costume. She had been a young woman, Vivian said, when she found Sarah by the nursery window. She had been tender at first, then wary. "I told Arthur," she said. "I said it would ruin everything. He said the house had to survive." Her hands trembled around a teacup. "We gave her to a cousin. We told ourselves it was for her good. That is what the family does, make rules and bury the rest." Later, Maya discovered through a brittle letter that Sarah had been sent to a seaside village and changed her last name. There were hints that her descendants lived not far from the Carter estate, working in the margins of the community, ordinary and unrecognized. The town hall hosted a charity auction, an event where old money rubbed elbows with new faces. Maya, refusing to be silenced, stood up when the silent auction paused and asked for a moment. The room, full of polite clinking, fell to a hush. She spoke plainly. About the portrait, the letters, the ledger. She read a passage from Benjamin Carter's letter to Nkem, a tiny, desperate plea promising recognition, then showing how recognition had been stolen. At first, people scowled. Then cell phones came alive with murmured recordings. In a matter of minutes, the story budded into worst-case scenarios, but also into outrage. Vivian, who had been watching from the front row, left the room with a face like a cut apple. Arthur's hand shook as he reached for a legal folder. The family pushed back with denials. Worn misinterpretations, Arthur declared in press statements later. Incomplete records. Lawyers arrived. The county paper printed thin paragraphs about family privacy. But a seed once planted does not wait for permission to grow. In the weeks that followed, histories poured out. An old midwife came forward with a name under her breath. A seamstress found a dress pattern with a note in the hem. A man who'd been a gardener decades ago told how, as a boy, he had been told to deliver parcels and never speak of the parcel's contents. Each testimony reassembled Sarah's silhouette grain by grain. Maya also found an unexpected ally. an old cousin named Elsie, who had left the family in her youth and carried an atlas of quiet rebellions. Elsie produced a sealed box from a trunk, photographs, school reports, a marriage certificate showing a name the Carters had erased: Sarah Lowry. Nay, Carter. The documents proved that Sarah lived, worked, and died with dignity outside the family's stained glass shadows. The Carters' public standing wavered. Neighbors whispered. The charity revoked invitations. The portrait hall, once a fortress, felt like an exposed ribcage. The family's darkest decision was revealed in an old ledger entry, a note about transferring funds to a small orphanage in the coastal town where Sarah had been placed. The funds were labeled "Maintenance Out of Sight." The ledger suggested not a charitable rescue, but a payment that amounted to forgetting by finance. They had bought silence for decades with the coin of care. When this finally came into public view, the community did not simply hiss. It began to ask for restitution. The local council demanded an apology. Survivors who had been descendants of those taken under the cover of protection demanded access to records and a formal accounting of what had been taken and what remained. Names, wages, photographs, stories. Vivienne, when she finally spoke to the press, could not form platitudes. In her face there was a rawness she had never allowed herself to feel. "We thought preserving the name preserved us," she said. "We were wrong. We have been hiding from our own truth." The Carters did not vanish. They were forced to look at themselves. Their lineage was no longer a flawless procession of pale faces. It was braided, complicated, human. The community demanded changes, public acknowledgments, a funded memorial for those erased, scholarships in Sarah's name, and efforts to trace and compensate descendants whose work and lives had been uncounted in the family ledgers. John and Maya did not leave each other. The crisis carved them rather than severed them. John confessed he had grown up cushioned by silence, and that the revelation had been his first real education in fault and consequence. He moved from defensiveness to action, helping to open the estate's archives and fighting against lawyers who wanted the documents sealed again. Maya, who had come to England with canvases and questions, painted the portrait of a child she found in the attic, not to reproduce the past but to mend it. Her painting toured the town hall, the university's small galleries, and finally the manor itself, where it hung among the old faces like an accusation and a balm. The last secret to fall into the light was not one the family could buy or lawyer away. In Arthur's private diaries, Maya found a notation that read simply, "I feared what the world would think of what I could not control. So I changed the story." Beneath it was a list of donations to churches, to orphanages, to out-of-the-way schools, coded in a way that suggested atonement and avoidance had been the same coin. But the final, sharpest twist came from a quiet corner. Sarah's granddaughter, a woman named Aisha Lowry, walked into the manor with a small, worn suitcase and a name that matched the margins of the ledger. She did not ask for money. She asked to be named. "A name is not an inheritance," she told the gathered room the day she read her grandmother's story aloud. "It is a right. I was never told where I came from except by rumor. I was given charity but not the truth. I am not here for the house. I am here for the story." She stayed in the town. She taught at the local school, helped design the memorial, and reluctantly accepted an offer from John to partner in restoring the estate archives. There was no perfect resolution. There was restitution, messy and incomplete. There was apology and stubbornness and the slow, difficult work of returning what had been taken in name and history. In the end, the Carters learned the most dangerous part of being human is pretending our differences make us other than one family. They learned that secrets fester until they become the very thing they were, meant to prevent decay. Maya stood at the portrait hall months later, the new painting between stern faces, and thought of how belonging is not given as inheritance, but earned by telling the truth loud, enough that even old portraits must listen. They had married into a different race. The town had whispered for years, but the darkest secret was never about race alone. It was about who we decide to count as family, who we hide in our cupboards, and how long a house can stand when its foundation is a lie. The worst betrayals are the ones that let us sleep at night, believing we are blameless. The best reckonings begin with a single person who refuses to look away.